I am following Swaziland every day. The situation with Hormuz, with Iran and Israel is complicated.
By the way, I love that you said every day in Serbian. That really made me happy. But how realistic is it? Like, does Israel really want to expand into Argentina? You think that Republika Srpska will join Serbia at some point?
Sure, at least this is my desire. I have a lot of friends in Banja Luka.
You have only one restaurant in Buenos Aires selling cevapcici. We have to change that. We're opening one next year.
Yes.
I have to use this opportunity. What do you think of Subotica? Do you think smaller states today have real sovereignty?
Not at all. Not at all. Argentina, in the two main world wars in the 20th century, we were neutral.
You have a lot of former Nazis there as well, don't you?
Sure, for sure. I used to interview more than 100 people who used to play football in Argentina, in Córdoba, in my city. And even though 70% of them, they were the lower class, even though they have only primary school. And when you talk with them, with these people at 70, 80 years, they have an heritage, a cultural heritage.
Have you ever talked to the descendants of the Croatian Ustaše about history, about politics? What do they think about the Ustaše? Hello and welcome to the Weight of Change podcast. My name is Boris Malagursky. Tonight's guest is Facundo Seara, an Argentine history teacher, writer, researcher, and commentator whose work touches on geopolitics, international relations, and the shifting balance of power in today's world. Coming from Argentina, a country now undergoing major political and economic changes under President Javier Milei, Facundo brings a perspective from the global south that is often missing in discussions dominated by Western narratives. At the same time, he has taken an interest in the Balkans, a region where questions of sovereignty, international intervention, and geopolitical pressure are still very much alive. As global tensions continue to rise from instability in the Middle East to the evolving rivalry between major powers, smaller regions like the Balkans often reflect broader patterns in international politics. Bosnia and Herzegovina, with its complex political structure and ongoing debates about sovereignty and international oversight, remains a particularly telling example. Tonight, we'll connect these dots from Argentina's international transformation under Milei to the Balkans and beyond and ask what those developments reveal about the future of global politics in an increasingly uncertain world. Facundo, hello and welcome to the Weight of Change podcast.
Well, Boris, it's really a pleasure to talk to you, and I am open to trying to develop some stuff related with Argentina's situation and for sure my love for Serbia as well.
So let's talk a little bit about Argentina first. Now, Argentina has gone a major political shift with the election of Javier Milei. Western audiences are somewhat knowledgeable about Milei. He's been attending CPAC conferences. He's, covered in Western media to extent. But from your perspective, you live there. What does his rise represent? Just a national phenomenon or part of a broader global trend?
When Javier Milei, he get the elections, it was like a really, it was a really crazy situation in general. He blows up the traditional party. Here, we have two main parties in Argentina. It's called Peronismo and Radicalismo. The Justicialist party that is historically the main popular party in Argentina, and on the other hand, maybe the center, right center party, but the phenomena of Javier Milei was, it's a surprise to everyone. In general, the main situation we are having now is the economy is not going well, even though the phenomena of his character and the particularity of his government, it's really complicated to understand. First of all, if you want to try to understand Argentinian policy, you have to understand that we have a 23 province and the main city is called Buenos Aires, and it's a very unequal country. Historically, at least in the 20th century, to understand Argentina, you have to understand that the governments needs to have structural powers, in every province. For example, I am in the middle of the country; it's called Cordoba. But if I go to the border of Brazil, we have at least from Cordoba in car 10 hours. And if you go to Patagonia, near Malvinas, Argentinas, for example, or Rio Gallegos, or the south part of our country, you have 1 day and a half. So every government to have to try to have the power of the government, you have to be a structural powers, in every province. And when Milei defeats Peronismo, everyone were asking, how is going to handle the government, how is going to try to be the national power in every province, in every village, in every city. For example, Cordoba have 427 small governments, local governments. It was like a strong situation. For sure that phenomena, it was held from the media, that for sure. And when you look the agenda, he's handled Zvakidan every day. You can figure out that he have this support of the big agenda, of the Western agenda in Argentina. And never, like a history teacher, I can tell you, never in 20th century we have a government who have some kind of character of colonial government. It's a colonial government. It's difficult to understand. It was so rushed because we used to have left-winger governments, or even though right-wingers. We have five strikes military governments in the 20th century, but never in the Argentinian contemporary history we have this kind of government that is some kind of colonial. When you look how is he's talking in the mass media, how is engaging all the geopolitical stuff with Israel. It's unbelievable. I don't know how many countries in the world support a president that is waving the Israel flag better than our flag. It's
But let me
difficult to understand that.
let me ask. By the way, I love that you said every day in Serbian. That really made me happy. But I actually, it's interesting that you talk about all these things about where Argentina is going right now. I always mention 2001 in Argentina when they had this huge economic crisis, and I actually tell this to people in Serbia because we very rarely change our governments in the Balkans, right? And in Argentina in 2001, you had 5 presidents in 2 weeks, and it was like this huge crisis where in the end you had Nestor Kirchner coming to power, who basically solved the economic crisis. What was that? Now, coming from an Argentinian in 2001, what happened then? Because I know, things may not be going great right now, but I want to give people a little bit of hope because Argentina also had the success story back in 2001. Is that correct?
For sure, it's really nice. You know about our history, our recent history. But when you try to understand 2001, you have to understand not only the 90s in Argentina, even though the 70s. Argentina destroyed our industrial kind of development project that we started in 1930. That's have a big strike in 1976 when the last military strike, that they changed the economic perspective of Argentina. Even though an industrial country transforming to a financial economy, and that situation, if you want to try to understand, that is like the first, the consequence of all this situation in the 70s, even those in the 80s with the first social democratic government of Alfonsín, and with the Menemismo, with Menem, he was the president of Argentina in the 90s, that have the blows up of 2001. So it's not a thing that appeared in one day. It was a big crisis of all the political situation and the economy situation that we used to have. If you think when for example, when we have the last democratic government before the strike of militaries in 1976 was Isabel Martínez de Perón, the last wife of General Perón. and the unemployment, people in Argentina was only the rate of unemployment was 6%. We have some kind of number of European country, and when you look in 2001, even though the 40% of people of population here was in poor situation, and it was because the factory get closed, and because the policy in general don't represent people. For example, Menem was the representative, the main government, the main party was Peronismo, but he was an elite, like an elite government. So to understand that, you have to figure out about first of all the economic situation that start with the last military government we have. That was, we say here, we have like a nickname. We say Cipallo. When you have a government like this, it's a government that they don't represent the national interest. And then we have you have like as like it is like some kind of government that they don't represent people. We bring here the social democracy that is not, for example, if you talk with, I am not, I'm not an intellectual guy. I don't even like to figure out like this. I involve in policy. I work with local governments here in Argentina, in Cordoba, and I am proud to be that I am Peronista. This is my belief. It's a way to see the life. Not a dogmatic guy or fanatic, because this is not our tradition. But if you want to figure out that, if you talk with some Peronista today, at least the hegemonic stuff of the party, everyone speak like a social democratic person. So all the situation blows up in 2001, and Nestor Kirchner presidency between 2003 and 2007. He was a really great president, at least for me, because he started to think about an industrial country again. You have to understand that Argentina, we get free of Spain, in 1810 and 1816 with our Independence Day. But afterwards, we bring the change of Spain. We were involved, in all the, not in the Commonwealth, but we were really submit from the Great Britain economy. So the situation of 2001 is complex. It's really complex. But first of all, you have to understand, how I told you before, all the economic situation that came before, 20 years before, this kind of crisis of power. We have, when blows up everything here in 2001, we have like a phrase here. It's called que se vayan todos. We don't want nobody here. That was that like this. But the situation, the crazy situation, is that after that, when you look Macri government, even though Cristina Fernandez Kirchner government, a lot of member of the elite, they changed the mask, but they were continuing the power. So that big crash that you can see in the society, it was like that. But sadly, afterwards, that situation changed. And if you, for example, look today, Milei, Minister of Defense, or one of the main allies have Milei, is called Patricia Bullrich. I don't know if you hear about her, but for example, she was a minister that she repressed all people, and she was related with the 90s governments and 2000 governments. So that's the situation, at least.
For me, it's interesting. 6 months before the 2001 crisis erupted, the IMF told the whole world that Argentina was their, golden student, and that everything was going to be great. What is the relationship between Argentina and the IMF today? Like, is it the same as it was before, or has Argentina learned its lesson?
It's the same. I think it doesn't change so much. If you, yeah, at least in my case, I think it's you can't. How can I tell you? You can't poke the eye or look some change of understand that situation. The relation for me is really similar.
That's really interesting, because a lot of people assume that if you have this one big change, one big protest, one big leader who is going to come and save the people, and then all you have to do is wait for this one big shift, and then all their problems are going to be solved. But what you're basically talking about is this pendulum. It's going back and forth, right? You have a situation that's good, and then it goes to bad, and then it goes to good again if the people are willing to fight. So it seems that politics is, a constant struggle, isn't it?
For sure, I really like to one of the of Serbian phrases that I enjoy more because I think it's really accurate. It's krvnija voda, the blood is not water, and for sure that Argentina is a really mix of culture, but we have a really strength of Italian, North Italian and South Italian blood. In my case, for example, my family, I have Italian roots, French roots, Spanish roots, but well, when I talk about that, I don't want to be, schematic, because I am a really respectful guy. But we have, I think, in the sociological terms, we have this kind of situation that we are, I am talking right now with my hands, and we are like sometimes. I think for Argentina, when we go to the streets and we go to protests and so on, we are like really determined. But when you try to make a plan, and to work to change the situation, it's not so simple. So a lot of stuff in Argentina used to be, a massive, a huge demonstrations, but afterwards, nothing changed. It happened with the last governments. We have some kind of, I don't know the name in English. It's called like cacerolazo when people go to the street. It used to happen in Serbia as well, again against Vucic, I think some years ago. Here in Argentina, it's really common that situation that you have massive demonstrations with a lot of anger, with a lot of with big speeches. We have our. I think that is another situation that you can maybe you can figure out in our culture. When I talk with my Serbian friends, they say you talk a lot of, and you have to be more, more like this. But I think you look or for example, or main representative, and they when they speak, they are going to change everything, and then the situation is similar. So I think do the demonstration to the change. You have a big route to get out, and it's not simple to figure out. And for sure, when you look all the interest you have in your country, it's more difficult. It's more difficult yet. Patagonia stuff and Israel today is one issue where we have open. And the first time in our history that we are talking about that is right now, because it's so
What is that?
impressive.
What is that all about? Explain to our audiences.
Look, in the 70s, our military forces, they have even though it came before with Theodor Herzl, the creator of this ideology of Zionism, the Zionism, he was you can read in the book, he put Palestina or Patagonia. Patagonia in the 40s, it was like a beautiful place, or a,
so this is where Milei is talking about giving a part of Patagonia to Israel. Is that correct?
Is that correct? But that's a situation that is not starting with Milei.
But how realistic is it? Like, does Israel really want to expand into Argentina?
It's crazy, but if you look, or how can I tell you, or the studies of our military forces, it's a fact, because it was in the 40s, in the 50s, even though, when the repressive force of military stay in Argentina, they have this kind of called Plan Andinia, the Andinia Plan. You can figure out, you can search it. That it was like a big hypothesis. And if you go to the south part, you always look Israeli. How can I tell you? Patagonia is so huge, and we don't have a big population there. It's not crazy to think about that. And when you travel to Patagonia, you can figure out that it's empirical now. And now the situation is so obvious that it's one plus one. It's two. Before, when people talk about that, it was it was like a conspiracy theory, or it was related, for example, like to right winger. You talk about that, but you're a right winger because we have here a lot of German people. and they put this kind of
You
discredit
you have
with all this
you have
kind of.
you have a lot of former Nazis there as well, don't you?
Sure, for sure, for sure. But even though you go to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, and you go to Once or to some kind of big hood we have here, and we have the fourth population of Jew in the world. So that is crazy for Argentina. And you have Ante Pavelic and Blagoje Jovic. It's like that's kind of situation. Argentina is a really mix of culture
Wait,
for sure. That that Peron,
do you know any people in
yeah.
Argentina who are descendants of Ustaše, who have the Croatian fascists who moved to Argentina after World War
For
II?
sure, for sure. And it was so funny. I don't want to put a name, but I have a teacher when I was studying, my a PhD that I was making. She's a study person, old woman, and she was her father was an Ustasha, and she put the surname in a Italian mood. She chopped the C, but for
She
example, in
Italianized
Cordoba,
her last name, yeah.
for sure. And that is really common here. Even though in Cordoba, where I'm living, you have a really big Croatian population. And one of the biggest, achievement of architectural stuff in my city, it was built for a lot of Croatian workers. That is true. In Buenos Aires, and in the northern cities of Argentina, you have more Serbian population. But it's a fact,
But I'm curious.
that.
Like, have you ever talked to the descendants of the Croatian Ustaše about history, about politics? What do they think about the Ustaše?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I talk. That called my attention. In Argentina, when I talk with the descendants, they don't even know what is that. I have a certain friend here and say, "You're Argentinian, you don't know nothing about your history." It's crazy, and he's my friend from Arangelovac in Somalia, and he get married with an Argentinian girl, and he's all the time complaining. We're really great friends. Um, but a lot of people here don't even know about that. It was like a new land, and a lot of people is like left behind the past. But when I was in Croatia, like 5, 6 years ago, it was really interest for me, because when I was in Zagreb, I meet people there, and when I was talking about with them, they were like a really compliant about Frank Tushman, and about the 90s and before. They say we don't even believe in the propaganda, and was stuff for me. But when I was in the coast part, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that this kind of hate, and this is difficult to understand, because it's some kind of acts. It's not rational. If you say, okay, I want to talk to you about the history and in a rational way, and I want to demonstrate that our behavior was. We have to do that, but no, it's some kind of childhood situation. But here in Argentina, a lot of people don't even know about that.
So, so,
It's
so,
sadly.
ba- so basically, you have descendants of these right-wing organizations, these Ustaše, Croats, and Serbs living there, and they don't care about the past, but people here care more.
For sure. We say here, even though we are our chat here, it's like we have a phrase here in the Latin word. We say "sos un perro verde," it's like a green dog. I don't know, but if in Serbia we have some kind of phrase like this, but it's really strange to talk about this. It's complicated, but I think it's a phenomenon that is happening. With the new generations, that they are not interested in what happened with their grandfather,
But are
and
there
so on.
are
It's
there
not
like
interesting.
cultural centers, churches? I've seen some photos when you have Ante Pavelic on the wall and stuff like that. The right wing Croatian fascist leader, you know,
Yes.
back there in the independent state of Croatia in World War II. Um, does that exist? Do people go there? Are there some adherents of that ideology?
Nothing. No, 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 no. The only, for example, twice I want to eat some cevapici, and you have only one restaurant in Buenos Aires that is handled for a Croatian family.
You have only one
But
restaurant in Buenos Aires selling cevapcici. We have to change that. We're opening one next year.
yes, and then make a really good one. But for example, it's not important that situation with the narrative is not persistent. You know,
what is
of
it?
course.
What is it that made you interested in the Balkans? When did this start? How did it start?
When I was young, you know, when I was really young, I used to be, you know, a really young high school student, and I remember my mother remember when I was looking some Kusturica films, and you know, my eyes start to I feel a really big connection. That situation it was increasing for the years, but I don't want to put only in a rational answer. You know, it's crazy. I am not a crazy guy, or maybe yes, but a lot of people when they ask me that say, okay, you have Serbian curve. No, I don't have Serbian roots. You hate Argentina and you what? Not at all. I'm really proud of my country, even though I work with local governments. What I told you before, I am involved in policy. I am really proud to be an Argentinian. But it's something that it goes not only in the rational way. I can tell you about Srpska. I can talk about the situation of what I really appreciate of Serbian people, the friendship that I have in Serbia, in all, you know, in
But wait, hold on.
Subotica, in Sombor.
So you've been to Subotica?
Okay, yeah, I was in Subotica.
That's my hometown. What do you
In
think?
Srem.
I have to ask. I have to, use this opportunity. What do you think of Subotica?
Danilo Kish. First of all, and I have a friend, for example, Soran. He get married in September in Zrenjanin. I have friends in Zrenjanin, and I really appreciate the human stuff of Serbian culture. But even though I have a deep feeling that it's difficult to put in words. I remember the first time I arrived in 2023, 2 years ago. I have a friend. She's going to come here to Buenos Aires in May, and I think I go return to Serbia now in June. And she told me, came to Jagodina. I take a bus going to Chupria, stop in Jagodina. And when I was with her and her boyfriend Branko and a friend Vladimir, we were in the car, you know, going to Manasia, to the Spotovats. And, you know, it's not the feeling of brotherhood, but it's something that is not, I think you have things in your life that is difficult to put in words or to explain how is the feeling you have. I have a deeply love for Serbian people in the rational thing, but when I was in Belgrade, you know, walking in Bračar or in Dorčol, I feel something that I don't know if you can put in word, but I say maybe or in Zeleny Venac. The first time I remember I was walking in Zeleny Venac, I say I was here. I don't know when, but it's difficult
maybe you were a
to
Serb in your previous life.
maybe.
No,
And I was born in 1981.
But it's interesting,
No,
you watched Kusturica movies when you were young, and now you speak some Serbian words, and you've traveled all around Serbia. How did it come from watching Kusturica movies and feeling the soul of those movies to you visiting Serbia and knowing all these Serbian words and Serbian history and everything? What happened in between?
I think one situation that really when I was studying history in contemporary history, because if you look all the curriculum or the curricula you have in university here, Eastern and Central European history is not even it's not obligatory, it's not mandatory. So I remember, and even though I graduated with a 10th, I choose to develop all the breakup of Yugoslavia. Even though your your work, I used to see the first time I see your work, I saw your work. It was in this part of my life. When I was studying all this situation of the breakup and the 90s war, I think one situation is like getting strong. And the first time that I traveled in the Balkans, it was in 2018. And I remember that when I was I started in Italy, then I was like 15 days in Slovenia, 20 days in Croatia. Then I was in Sarajevo for 15 days. And it was really funny for me when I was visiting all these kind of memorials or this kind of museum, war museums and so on, how they count the history, And then I never saw in my life, and believe me, some kind of propagandistic situation. Even though I remember when I was in Sarajevo and I saw the main show, the main situation in the national museum. It's not a private one; it's a national museum. When they talk about Dayton treatment, the Dayton situation, and so on, it was sponsored from the embassy of the state. I never saw that in my life. I remember now that
It was
you.
sponsored by the U.S. Embassy in the National Museum in Sarajevo.
That blows my mind. I remember it was in 2018, and I say it's a national museum. And it was, in script, in the lowest part, U.S. Embassy. It was crazy. It was really crazy. And I think all the situation when I was talking with travelers, with backpackers and so on, this kind of hostel situation or we're talking, in a gig or what I really like rock and roll. You talk with the hegemonic propaganda or the mainstream, perspective. It's unbelievable, It's you look how Serbian people kill innocent people, and I say, brother, for sure that is your main understanding of one situation of one really complex situation. Nobody's defending war. I am not making nothing of propagandistic situation, but if you tell me that this really complex situation it's only related with Serbian people killing innocent Serbian army killing innocent people. If you think that, I don't know, shame on you, brother. But that situation, I think, make me more, make me more put the emphasis to try to understand more.
So what did you
Not
what did you understand about the 1990s in the Balkans? Like, what is your perspective on why the country broke up and what really happened?
You have to talk to German government and to the states. It's a shame that a country like Yugoslavia, and for sure, in my case, I'm not defending, all the communist time. I really like, Jeremy Zilnik, all the black wave for me is amazing in the cultural situation. You can figure out a lot of critics, in the Tito rules, uh, even though Kosovo that is unbelievable, but it was a fratricidia, war, and when you look how Germans, put fire in the stove, helping Croatians, and all the states, even though the Great Britain situation, handle and putting fire on that, it's a shame, it's a shame that have to blows up the situation. It's really difficult to be, in the we say here, estar en los zapatos, ponerte en los zapatos. It's like being, in the shoes of, of the rulers of the time. But it's really easy to see how the Western powers were involved on the situation, and that is the main stuff that I think the narrative have to put, the emphasis about that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the Balkans right now? What do you think about the political situation, for example, in Bosnia, where you have a system where the high representative is basically overriding elected officials? From an outside perspective, how do you interpret this model of governance?
It's impossible to understand for me. It's like even though it's funny, I don't know how this kind of fake stability can be handled, and I have but a deeply respect. If I tell you before that I have a deep respect for Serbian people, I was in Banja Luka, I was in Prijedor, and I have a truly deeply respect from all the Serbs of the Republika Srpska, and I can understand that. I can understand how this situation is continuing like this. A lot of people say that you have to be aware of talking of this situation. I'm trying to be, trying to be calm, but um, it's difficult to put in words. You're waiting a lot of time to join, and for sure that when you talk about determination, it's a thing that for me later or sooner is going to happen. For sure that I don't want to be sounding disrespectful. It's not my intention,
What exactly do
but
you think is going to happen sooner or later?
you have Serbian have samo sloga Serbian es Pasova. You have to go to the unit of Serbian people.
You
It's
think
my
you
it's
think
my
that you think
entire
that
desire.
you think that Republika Srpska will join Serbia at some point?
For sure, at least this is my desire. I have a lot of friends in Banja Luka, and how I tell you before in Prijedor, and I talk with them, and they are waiting. They are waiting, and for me, it will be really nice if that happens. I have a deep respect from Dodik as well. He's fighting in a really unequal and unfair situation. And my idea, at least it's not my idea. I think that is a situation that sooner or later it has to be like this. You can't be fixing or putting all the time like when you have an injury, or we have another phrase in Argentina. We say estás poniendo. Sorry if I choose if I put some Spanish situation, but my English is not so good. You are putting a lot of estás poniendo basura abajo de la alfombra. You're putting some all the time trash. You're trying to hide the trash, even though the pillow. So sometimes that trash you can't hide it. You have some historical process that are going to happen and are inevitable. A lot of people. It's the same situation with Kosovo.
Do you think
Yeah.
before we move on to Kosovo, do you think that Dodik would be able to diplomatically achieve what you're talking about, Republika Srpska joining Serbia, considering that he's had these sanctions removed recently? Donald Trump's son, business entrepreneur Don Jr., visited Banja Luka. They've had visits from General Flynn and major Republicans, and Dodik visited CPAC as well. He's been welcomed in the White House. He's been talking to Congress and senators in Washington. Do you think that this diplomatic offensive is actually about gaining diplomatic support for this goal?
It's going to be really tough. And how I told you before, I think Dodik, in the region, he's, in constant attack with in the hood. It's my will. It's really complicated for me to give you a response. If we'll be able, nothing is impossible. I was aware of the visit of the son of Trump. It will be complicated, but I think he can achieve. He can achieve. I don't know. I don't know the times. It's difficult to make some kind of, we say here, futurología, trying to predict the future. And even though in this really complicated scenario we have right now in the world, but at least I am talking you not in a rational way, maybe more in the will or in my personal perspectives, Boris.
Well, but what about Kosovo? Do you think that a lot of people in Serbia have this opinion that Kosovo is lost, it can never be regained, and Serbia was bombed in 1999 to take Kosovo from Serbia? What do you think is the perspective there?
Well, one thing not to feel it. One thing I want to tell you, not for you feel it alone in this situation. We have the same situation with Malvinas. Even though Malvinas, I never saw Malvinas in my life. It's really far away. It's really daleko. We are if you go to the north part of Argentina, but we have it in our imaginario, in our mind. And when we lost the war in 1982, we have a lot of people here that have this kind of uh, negationist, or this situation of trying to be, okay, we lost the war, and we don't have the right to claim. But that is a perspective that is handled for at least in Argentina, and I think in Serbia is the same, for the mass media, and people have to know that when they are reproducing this speech, they are making, the game to the enemy. That's the situation that I saw. I think, I don't know how is, maybe you can tell me better. I think that kind of speech are more active in the big cities, maybe in some kind of progressive statement of the society. I don't know if all Serbia Serbian people have this situation. Even though when I was in South Park, in Niš, in Leskovac, I talked with people, and it was really proud of me, to hear them how they have in their mind. You have to have Kosovo, Metohija, Zvakidan every day in the wheel, and it's the same situation. It's not going to be easy. I think we are, and even those in our times, we're living, very fast, very quick, and sometimes we lost the geopolitical perspective. But one thing but for sure that I think we have to have clear is that in the speech, in everyday speech, you don't have to let it doubt that Kosovo is the source of Serbia, is the main spiritual part of Serbia, and works like you do, Boris. It's really important for trying to break out this massive propaganda you have, in the Western situation, at least in the Latin stuff. A lot of Spanish people, they they are interested in the Balkans, and how I tell you, 95% of all the biography perspective of the Balkans are handled from the Western from Western media. So it's really important. A lot of people say, okay, make a tweet or talk with the truth. It's not important because but I think it's really important. Geopolitical way, how I tell you, it's really complicated. But I think in the Svakidan, in every day with the active situation we can do, are not only a way of demagogic stuff. It's important to have aware of the situation. No?
I absolutely agree. Both Argentina and countries in the Balkans have experienced strong influence from larger global powers. Do you think smaller states today have real sovereignty?
Not at all. Not at all. Even though you can look all the situation in Argentina, for example, with this kind of pandemic stuff and so on. A country like Argentina, how I tell you, if you go to the south to the north, you have 3 days and a half driving by car. If you want to go Argentina, south to north or north to south. And one day, this kind of I don't even remember the name. I think he have this kind of surname of Greek heritage. They make the health agenda of a country of Argentina. You can figure out, a small country in Africa, or a small state, in the Eastern Europe. Uh, it's really difficult to fight for sovereignty, for have an agenda that are not ruled from this Western propaganda and Western powers. For that, for example, when I talk about Dodik, I say chapeau, and you can, and it's like that. We have another phrase here. Juan Domingo Perón, our general, used to say it. He say, no es elegir entre el arcángel San Gabriel o Perón, es elegir entre Perón o Braden. He was saying, it's not to trying to choose between the Archangel, San Gabriel, or Dodic. It's fine. A lot of people say, okay, I don't like about one policy of him, or I don't like about this situation of him, and I deny everything. It's not like this. In policy, you have to be aware who is your enemy of you. So you're not choosing about Archangel San Gabriel, or Georgian, or San Jorge, or Dodic. You're choosing about UA, or Dodic. That's the situation that a lot of people have to be aware about that. But happening in Argentina as well. Is nobody is prophet in his land. Um,
Yeah, but
that's
it seems like that a lot of people in politics are looking for a messiah, somebody who will save them. Whereas, the way I see politics is, if there's something you want, you have to fight for it in a democratic society, and not think that somebody's gonna show up and and fix all your problems. If you're just waiting for somebody to save you, that's likely not going to happen. It could happen even if you have like the best of intentions, the best promises, the best team and everything. You still need an engaged populace fighting for their democratic rights. But I wanted to ask you, with rising tensions in the Middle East and increasing rivalry between major powers, do you think the world's entering a more unstable period?
for sure. Sadly, I am following Swaziland every day. The situation with Hormuz, with Iran and Israel, is complicated. In Argentina perspective, uh, we are. I don't know what Milei is thinking about that. He's destroying, because when you talk about diplomacy policy, you have to be aware that it's not a government uh, will. It's a national perspective. Argentina, in the two main world wars in the 20th century, we were neutral. Of course. Then we have, like you talked before, this kind of roots with German Nazis that they flee here, um, and this kind of some kind of support, but in the private behavior, not in the public one. Uh, and I think that is one of the things that Argentina is one of the I don't know, it's the best quality we have, but it's really nice. For example, we can have a lot of economic situations and so on, but in the social stuff we are really mixed. But we have some kind of this kind of respect of this kind of cultures. Not in the progressive mood that I am talking about, you, Boris. I know you understand. But now, for example, this relation that is having Milei with Israel, and I don't want to I'm not going to say Israel is bad, Iran is. I am not talking this kind of normal kind of analysis, but it's really complicated because we used to have, I don't know if you know, but in the 90s we had two major terrorist attacks in Argentina. We have in the embassy of Israel and in the AMIA, and they murder not Jews, they murder Argentinian people. And I think he doesn't know what is the game he's involving. We don't the security defense or perspective that we have in Argentina is really poor. We have the last governments; they are not increasing amount of or incomes in security staff. Or military force are not good, at least if you saw in perspective. So I think, sadly, at least following the news and the situation, I think the government, the main geopolitical situation in Middle East and in the world is increasing.
Do you think that neutrality is something that is best option for states to pursue at this point?
No, no, no. No. I think that Argentina, in our case, uh, in the situation of Argentina, that we have this kind of 100 years of neutrality policy. I think you have to respect some kind of situation. And even though when you look this kind of situation, I don't want to see like a crusader guy, you know. I am trying to be, you know, in Argentina, how I tell you before, you have you have a German village in Cordoba. It's called Villa General Belgrano. Like you go to Bavaria, and then you go to Once, and you have a big youth population, and you have Polish, and you have Serbs, you have Croats, you have Majarska people. Um, and that's the situation that we create in, at least in our community. I think it for with of course with the power of the state, and with this kind of perspective that have our national leaders in the late 19th century and the beginning of 20th century. It works. It works, but because they can integrate a community really different. But now the situation, it's difficult to respond, Boris. I think in Argentina case, you know, this situation about, you know, Jerusalem, or this kind of dispute that are in the middle in Iran and so on. It's not a business. It's not our business. I think it's a thing that we have to at least in Argentina, we have to put the emphasis in to people eat. You know, we have 50% of people that are not covering the national the economic situation. So I think the government have to put aware Argentinians first. You know, that for sure. It's difficult to be. I'm going to be neutral. I'm not telling you that this is a situation you can handle with easily, but for sure that if the national government of Argentina uh, have to have agenda, the first thing you have to put in the agenda is the wealthy of your people. You know, maybe it's a chauvinist thing. I don't know, but the situation of Argentina, however, believe me, in the economic stuff is really bad, and we are, you know, supporting this year after year. And the economic numbers are really bad. You know, even though when you think in Argentina, you were, and in Latin America in general, the only country with Uruguay maybe as well, but that you have medium classes, it was Argentina. Now the situation of the national government have to put in the agenda Argentinian needs, and our first need is really sad to say is education, you know, growth economy, and trying to get to return to our industrial situation.
If you were advising a Balkan country today, what lessons from Argentina's experience would you emphasize? Are these the things that you would tell Balkan countries to focus on as well? That focus on their own interests and their own sovereignty? How realistic is it, considering how colonized we are by the West?
That is really your answer is really great. You know, your question is really great. Sorry. What I want to tell you with this, Boris. We have another phrase here in Spanish. Juan Perón say as well. He say that la política es la política internacional. The policy is international policy. All the things you have, the issues you have in your country are domestic things, you know. And I am agree with that. I am agree with that. The almost situation today with it's have an impact, have a global impact. That's for sure. But I want to tell you that at least what I'm showing here in this conjunctural or on this local perspective that we have in Argentina, it's difficult to be, and we are not even like a main actor in this situation. And can you repeat me the last?
How realistic is it to pursue all these things that you discussed, having focusing on the national interests when you're basically colonized by the West and under control of Western powers?
Yeah. Well, you are it's impossible about that. At least when you are colonized and you have this kind of hegemonic situation, for example, in Argentina, it's difficult to understand. You have a lot of people who is wearing, a Union Jack shirt, even though the 12th April, that is the day of Malvinas. This is crazy. And even though when you look, that's the situation that is difficult to understand. When you look this this situation against Israel again, Iran or the states with Israel, for example, the only perspective that I think a sovereign country can have is to say NATO is our enemy. Toe to. That's the situation. They took the Sea Harrier here. They bombed our soldiers. They stole Malvinas. That is the only perspective that I think we have to have. Of course, that then you have to negotiate. It's not the policies. It's not dogmatic situation. Everything. The real politics is one thing, and the policy is another thing. I understand that, but it's unbelievable. If I tell you the truth, I think 70% of Argentinian population is with NATO. And it's impossible to understand, in the rational way. Say, brother, Margaret Thatcher, they destroyed Crucero Belgrano. They murdered 323 soldiers in the sea in a exclusion area. They kill us. They bomb, and you saw that in the 1982. This kind of pessimist speech is growing up. Oh, because we have a military strike and they were. I don't. That does not matter for me. I don't. Maybe Galtieri. It wasn't a legitimate government ruler or whatever. But we were in war. We have a really truly reclaim for the sovereignty of Malvinas. Another situation. But now, yes, I can tell you that maybe 70% is destroyed with this kind of agenda, and for sure with Israel and with the states. And Milei is the kind of archetype who is involving that. When you have a national speech, or when you say put Argentina first, or trying to say, we have to grow up in industry or whatever, you are like an old school guy, or you are, some kind of nationalistic right winger. That is the mediatic agenda for sure. You put the TV, you hear the music, or even though that situation is crazy, and it happened to me when I wrote my last trilogy. I used to interview more than 100 people who used to play football in Argentina, in Cordoba, in my city. And even though 70% of them, they were lower class, even though they have only primary school. And when you talk with them, with these people of 70, 80 years, they have an heritage, a cultural heritage that they can talk an hour. They use really respectful words, and they have a dignity way to see the life. And when you look at the new generations, I am a teacher, and I am not a pessimistic guy. But it's like we are, for example, bombing with all this kind of reggaeton and new central music that is not involved with our culture, with our costumes. And Milei, that's a situation that I want to tell you. Never in Argentina times, in the contemporary history, we have a president that he's not representing. He don't have nothing to represent of Argentina. I swear it. I don't want to be sound like a critical murder with him. But when you look how he talk, how his act, his government acts, and so on, you say this guy doesn't represent Argentinian. It's amazing how he is in the power, because you can like more a right winger government, a left winger, a central. It's not an ideological stuff. It's a way that he's not representing Argentinian people, and I'm feeling ashamed when you look. He's singing, in the stage, or he's making this kind of speeches. Even though it was really funny because in the economic platform he said that he was an specialist of increasing government in the economy stuff. I never hear some kind of economy that economists that he can't show anyone. Of course that you can say, okay, you have 4 years. It's not so much, but you don't have any one economic issue that he gets better in Argentina. Not single one. So
I have to say, as we're drawing to the end of our podcast, I noticed that you're inserting a lot of Serbian words here and there. Do you speak Serbian?
no. Another thing, I saw a lot of Serbian films. I was in Serbia. I have friends in Serbia. And entiendo. I can understand. But even though I think that is a Latin situation, we are very lazy with the. You can figure out even my English is not good, but I think it's one of it's not so similar to us. But how I tell you before, that is our Hispanic roots. If you go to Argentina till Mexico, we can have a lot of thousands of kilometers, but we have the same language, the same religion. Even though you go to Brazil, that they were Portuguese, but we understand. So, but yes, Preacher Srpski, it's complicated for me to govern him, but I can understand because I am related every day with my friends. Now I have a friend from Belgrade. They're going to come in May to Argentina, so I can understand, but I never study, in the it's more a thing that I feel in my cells, in my douche.
Mm-hmm. That's really great to hear. Your English is just fine. We can understand each other great, and I'm happy that you're a fan of Serbian films of Serbia. I'm actually a big fan of Argentina. I'm a fan of Argentinian films. I've watched quite a bit of Argentinian films. I think Wild Tales is an Argentinian movie, and I watched that
Yes.
film. It's an omnibus, right? Like, there's a bunch of stories in there. But, watching that film, and this is something I recommend to audiences if they haven't seen it. It was at the Belgrade Festival Fest several years back. It's starting to be an older film at this point, but it's relatively recent compared to cinematography, how long it is. But when I watched that film about, there's this, I think it's the first story where these, two cars, they have these like, they have this little fight that it starts off small and insignificant, and it flares up into this life or death situation. And looking at that, I could really sense the Balkan spirit in those films. I could see the similarity between, there's one of those stories where the kid runs somebody over with a car, and he's a rich family's kid, and they're trying to figure out what to do and whether to pay off this guy who works for them to place the blame on him driving the car. And then they start talking about how much money they're going to give, and at some point they want to give all the money, but then like, maybe we could, Cenkamo, says we would say in Serbian, trying to find the right price. And it's looking at that, and it's like it's like looking at a Serbian film. There's no difference. So I think the cultural similarities are great just from looking at the cinematography. But as I said, I haven't visited Argentina, and I'd love to go there. And I'm sorry to hear that a lot of people in Argentina are fans of NATO. They should watch more of my films, perhaps, and maybe we could organize a screening in Argentina or somewhere.
We really need you, another Boris from here, to fight about. I used to be involved, we have a really, and I really recommend you. I was in policy with him when I was really young. He was more a left-winger guy, but, he was an old school guy. And with this situation, even though I can disagree in some local stuff with him, he died some years ago. But even though this kind of situation, in all the film he makes, it's called Pino Solanas, Fernando Pino Solanas. He shows with his works all the how we used to depend from Great Britain in the 20th centuries. And well, he showed, even though it's one of his last documentaries, it was about the blows up into 2001. So if you are interested, I can send you some links from his work. It's
That'd
really
be
nice.
great. Absolutely.
And I don't remember the name of this amazing Serbian film, but it's related what you talked me before. In Spanish, the film you call is called Relatos Salvajes. It's all these kind of short stories that people get mad and how they handle all the frustration. That is really similar. And I get noticed when I was in Serbia, at least in Belgrade, with this kind of verso situation. But this guy, if I tell you this scene, you're going to tell me the name of this Serbian film. This young guy who is in the bus, and he get mad because the bus driver, he was drinking a coffee, and the guys, he blows up and he make a really big speech in this bus, saying, arguing with the bus driver, and he took the
The wheel.
the wheel, and he go up and he start to yellow with the two all couple, and it's really nice how I don't remember the name of.
It sounds really familiar, but I can't remember the name at this point. Maybe somebody in the comments could figure out the name of the film and post it.
It's really nice because he find the director find in every character, for example, this kind of people supporter of Tito, these two old couple, and he's like making a big criticizing the society, and he find he's a beautiful girl that she don't give a.
Is it perhaps is it a movie about the 7 deadly sins, or is it something different?
No, I think it's more. It's not like that from this. It's not from Shilnik from Dusan Macabre. It's more.
I may have mixed it up, but somebody in the comments will figure it out for sure.
Great.
So, well, thank you for coming to the podcast. It was a great honor talking to you and getting an Argentinian perspective. And I talked to Aaron Palacios a couple of podcasts back. He's from Venezuela, lives in the United States. Great guy. And hi to Aaron if he's watching. And we talked about this idea about making a movie where we would go throughout Latin America and visiting Balkan societies that live there, because he said there's a village close to Caracas in Venezuela where there's a lot of Serbs living and Serbs marrying Venezuelan women and having families there and everything. So I think it will be really interesting to visit Argentina as well and maybe cover the perspective of those communities there. And I would love to talk to both Serbs and Croats and all the groups from the Balkans. And I'd love to see how they view history, whether they care or not from any sort of agenda perspective, but just like out of curiosity. I'm really curious about what they think and how they feel and how they live and what they think about politics and history. And if that's something that sounds interesting to you, maybe before you come in the summer, and I'd love to meet you in the summer as well, you could do a little bit of research on those communities and let me know where they live and who we could talk to.
For sure, come with this. It will be really really nice to meet you in person and to receive you here in Argentina. I want to tell you one other thing that I forget. The president of the legislative party of Unión Cívica Radical is called Matías Kusunovic. He's a really friend of mine, and he's starting a project. He is making a small Orthodox chapel, Serbian Orthodox, in Arias. It's a really small village in southern eastern Cordoba, and we are in touch every day, so we can organize. It would be really nice to.
That'd be really cool. I'd love
I
to
want
go.
to tell you another thing before. I remember I have a friends in Belgrade that they are going to come here, that they love you, Boris. They love you. I remember I was in Zas Cafe. I don't remember. It was blizu Srpska, Boulevard Revolution, ex Boulevard Revolution, and we were drinking and we were watching your videos, and say you have to see Boris. They really love you. So then when
hi to them, and we'll all have coffee in the summer when you come. It would be my pleasure. And as I said, it's my life's dream to visit Latin America. I've never been. The closest I've been is Cuba, I guess. But I've never been anywhere more south. I've been to Mexico, but that's pretty much it. Mexico City, for a screening at Tec de Monterrey, and it was really a memorable trip. But maybe we could do one big film tour. And if somebody's watching this and wants to sponsor this film idea, write me in the comments. We're always in need of a budget. But it's just something that I love to do. And I think a lot of people will be interested to watch and find out, not just from the Balkans or people from Latin America, but from around the world, because you have this, two different parts of the world that seem to have some sort of shared culture. And this is what I see in the filmography, in the cinematography, and the cinemas of all these countries. And I think I have a hunch that if we connect these two communities, that the similarities would be obvious. So yeah, well, thank you for your perspective on the Balkans. We'll surely have you back on the Weight of Change podcast. And until then, have a great time with your friends in Argentina. And when you come to Serbia, we'll have some coffee.
Thanks for everything, Boris. Vidimo se uskoro, and all the best for you. It's a pleasure for me to share with you. I hope that my English was good. It's not the better, but I think you understand, and that's the main idea.
It was great.
And you're welcome in Argentina.
Thank you very much. Thanks.